Welcome back. Welcome back to this second part of the afternoon of the Starts Day here in Linz at the 21 Ars Electronica Festival. I'm happy to be back here with a number of great speakers. We're going to talk about Fabrication Deep Dive. And it's a panel with a number of participants, Michela Magas, who you see there, who I will introduce soon, Areti Markopoulou, and the two lead design researchers, Marion and Anastasia Pistofidou. So what we're going to talk about is about the merger of the Fab Lab infrastructure that you see emerging, how this becomes very grown up, and it's not only about trying to do something with a 3D printer, but it's currently a carrier and a pusher, those labs, of real material transformations in design processes. So rethinking and restructuring production cycles is becoming more and more urgent, and artists, architects, designers, engineers are at the forefront of developing prototypes and processes that have the potential to make manufacturing across various fields more sustainable, equitable, and empathic towards both humans and the environment. That last part is very important, I think. From ethical design principles to revolutionary techniques building to material innovation in production design, in product design, this keynote and roundtable discussion brings together revolutionary, I might say, perspectives from architecture, robotics, and digital fabrication. So first, I want to introduce our first keynote speaker that we were lucky to get for this, who is Michela Magas. Actually, Michela was part of one of the first STARTS initiatives before it was called STARTS even, which was called ICT in Art Connect. That project resulted in the European Commission being confident that this is a very important way to go to create the combination of complementary research between art and artists, that of technologists, and that of science. Michela is the initiator of Industry Commons, and she bridges research and industry with a track record of 25 years of innovations. She's chair of the Industry Commons Foundation, I said that already, innovation advisor to the European Commission and the G7 leaders, member of President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus, and member of the advisory board of CERN. It's impressive. She created the Industry Commons concept in 2015, whilst co-chairing the Innovation Ecosystems workgroup for the Alliance of Internet of Things Innovation, so IIoT. AIoTI. In 2017, she was awarded European Woman Innovator of the Year, and 2016, she was presented with an Innovation Luminary Award for Creative Innovation by the European Commission and Intel Labs Europe. We can go on, there's much more, but I think everybody's craving for the story you have to tell, because that is interesting, specifically on the topic of manufacturing and the new evolution that is undergoing. So please give her a warm applause as welcome, Michela Magas.
Thank you, Lucas, for this really generous introduction, and you will get a degree in European Commission acronyms for this.
They're tongue twisters.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're laughing. I think you need a degree in this, don't you? I'm so pleased that you mentioned our work together at the beginning of Starts, because I actually will mention that in a minute. I will share my screen first. So let me see if we can see my slides. Just bear with me 1 second. So hopefully you can see my slides now.
Yep.
So I've actually used the title, "The Lab as a Docking Point for Industry," and you might wonder where that comes from. And it actually comes from President von der Leyen's opinion piece that she wrote at the launch of the new European Bauhaus. So I thought that might be very interesting, that the sort of language that is now part of the top-level policy making, which may actually be familiar to some of us, and I think it's very interesting language. And when she launched it at the inaugural speech or the State of the Union speech on the 16th of September 2020, she presented a methodology of co-creation, which I think is very familiar to some of us here. And so it is remarkable because it puts culture at the center of policy making and this really grand ambition for the very first time. But there's another thing that's really remarkable about it, and that is, if you actually knew the European Constitution, you would know that culture is the domain of individual member states. So there isn't really a mechanism to place culture at top level as it has been done. And so this is actually a really bold move on many accounts, and I think it's worth understanding that part. Right from the beginning, I mean, I'm just summarizing, for a few of you are familiar with the European Bauhaus, but I'm summarizing a few essential elements of it, so for those of you who are perhaps not so familiar. This is just a few of the official partners. There are 270. Ars Electronica was one of the first. They were chosen from over 700 applicants, but the partners actually have a very, very big commitment that they have to fulfill. So it's not a simple thing to become a partner. And there's a great deal of work attached to it, which is why there are 270, which is a lot already. And they come from all kinds of backgrounds, and we have even sort of nanotechnology, and we have all kinds of unions for the sustainable living, for instance, and not just creative industries and architects, and as well as, of course, accessibility organizations, as you can see here. And so I'm honored to be part of the high-level roundtable with some amazing and inspiring people who come from all kinds of backgrounds. And I could highlight many things here, but perhaps I should mention Sheila Patel, who is a phenomenal woman who's working with women's collectives in India. And she's constantly pulling us back from being Eurocentric. And this has been hugely appreciated in our discussions as high-level roundtable. And this is just an example of sort of some of the methodologies we've introduced, working methodologies, which are unusual again in policy making. And this one, for instance, shows you how we map our values. As a high-level roundtable, we decided to map our values first before we make any decisions. And what we identified is a very, very strong line of justice, social justice more than anything. And inclusion and social justice seem to be very much the driving force of our thinking. And then, of course, there's a line of respect for the environment, respect for our both our built and our natural environment. A huge amount of suggestions have been sent to the New European Bauhaus, so these are just a few of them, but there are thousands literally. So amazing projects out there, and they've all been collated, they've all been read and digested. So basically the work that has been done has been both in terms of consulting the partners, consulting the high-level roundtable and mapping out our views and our values, but also in collecting all of this intelligence from the ground. And so as a high-level roundtable, we've ended up with a concept paper, which you can actually access online. It's rather long, but it contains things like the life cycle, introducing the life cycle into our thinking, promoting a new circular tectonics, for example, which I think is very, very relevant for industry. And we had a huge conference, 8,000 participants, so just to give you an idea of just how many people are really interested in engaging actively with this. And if you look at some of the brainstorming, the terms used in brainstorming, of course they'll be extremely familiar. So again, this idea of a lab, the idea of prototyping, the idea of making, all of these are actually at the foundation of creating this movement. And again, the idea that we have really, really strongly advocating for is feeding grassroots experimentation directly into high-level policy. So this is also part of our paper. And this is on Monday, actually, a meeting with the President and Commissioners Gabriel and Ferreira, and very, very active and this engaged, and this conversation is very much ongoing. So I'm winding back here to the moment that Lucas has mentioned, which is when we were working on the precursor of START, or rather the project that actually gave birth to the START initiative. And of course, it shows you very, very clearly how experimentation can set up, can highlight concerns and sort of future paradigms, or what is a paradigm for us at that moment. For instance, in this case, data ethics, which we were all working on at the time, was not really high on the agenda in policy at the time. And so this is a classic example of we are all aware of how this works. It takes a long time for the actual conditions out in industry to be aligned in a way that then highlights that a paradigm shift is needed in this direction. So in the past, we were counting on sort of waiting for 10 years, 10 years between experimentation in the arts to when things are deployed. But things have sort of rather sped up. So back from around that time, experimental labs, this is us running with the London Symphony Orchestra and the Barbican. So the labs that came out, this is our third year that we were doing labs. And so basically maker mentality, Fab Lab mentality combined with the digital and with creativity and with science, etc. I mean, you are all familiar with this. But the experimental lab was also then part of the language that was used by President von der Leyen in her opinion piece at the launch of the New European Bauhaus. So it is actually interesting how this language is now being used at high level. And this is an example of the project that one of the projects came out of that as an evolution. So parallel to the STARTS program that was launched, we were doing test beds, but we were looking at methodologies to enable communities of makers and labs. Again, these kinds of things were fed directly to the innovation recommendations for the Horizon program at the time. So we were already paving the way for translating prototyping and experimentation into policy. Another example of where the paradigm shift is happening, and is certainly coming from the creative sector, I would say, is in reframing the notion of ability. And again, it's from the idea of prototyping, making, and creating new conditions in the digital. And these are a couple of really successful projects that have come out of our community, but basically there are many examples out there. And it is definitely reframing the idea of the future of work, what it means to be able, and who is the able-bodied in this new context. this is again another thing that will be very familiar to the Ars Electronica community, of course, working with frontier technologies and creating completely new formats, and then testing how those affect human beings. And there's a huge amount of works that we could quote there. This is one of our labs. So basically, this is data bots in one of our labs. And I believe they were also part of Ars Electronica. And this is some of the latest ones. This is last year during the pandemic, running a lab in situ in this one of the largest wetlands in Europe, considering our interaction with broader ecosystems and dealing with the idea of artificial life that was built on top of these ecosystems. And we are about to run our 20th one of those in Aveiro, again, and with satellites all around the world that participate. Again, another concern that you will now see reflected in what's happening, and I'm about to show you some of those, but also how we scaled this idea, this ecosystem approach. The idea, this is a sketch to show the idea that the verticals are rather blending to some extent, and there is a culture that's dissecting across this blend, and where cultures connect and merge, there are new values emerging. And this is rather abstract, but it actually turned into something very, very concrete for us, which is the industry commons. And now we're working on industry commons with a huge amount of industry partners. It's very much gathered momentum, set of horizontal enablers that allow us to interoperate between different domains, so knowledge domains, industrial domains, and creating very much a space of common understanding. So industry commons is very much a space of common understanding. And our first enabling framework is an ontology ecosystem, and this is what we're currently building. And it's going into all kinds of other enabling systems, so it's very much now part of the Horizon program. It's actually an official track in the Horizon program, this idea and this concept. So this brings me to this junction between culture, creativity, and industry. And these are two statements that were made just before the pandemic. And they look like a dichotomy. They look like they're two completely disparate things. But actually, we've already seen, how they influence each other. And I would like to run you through just a few examples of that now, because you can see the direct impact that is being now had at high level, obviously, through the culture being central to the new European Bauhaus initiative. So this is, for example, our reaction from the arts to the Industry 4.0 paradigm of automation, and so us attempting to bring the human-centric perspective into it. This is us at the AI Impact Lab in Örebro. Now, that's an example of sort of where we are trying to shift the paradigm. And interestingly, Industry 4.0 automation has now shifted to the Industry 5.0 human-centric paradigm. So already in the current framework program, it has moved to human-centric. But actually, because we are now engaged with the new European Bauhaus, so we are able to feed policy very much with, with the sort of next paradigm that is really very much something that's central currently to the arts, is the idea of shifting to the more than human ecosystemic approach, and that's already, in our concept paper. So, I would challenge industry to shift to 6.0 in a few years, 3-4 years. I give them to do that. And the idea of inclusion, massive, in the labs and its prototyping environments. All kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of ages, and of course, huge amount of female participation in something that is traditionally considered very technical. And in industry, you don't get the sort of gender split that you get in the labs. In this case, for instance, we had 53% female participation with over 800 people hands-on prototyping. And the other three were 3 different gender categories, so you also have to account for that. So it wasn't just 2 categories, it's 53% female in 4 categories. And so when we look at Industry 5.0, now inclusion is very much part of that, and it wishes to include several categories of people. This is how this is worded. And what we are looking at in the European Bauhaus is actually, again, a paradigm shift where what you do is you don't have people in categories. What you focus on is radical inclusion, which is basically on where we converge. And so it's a different starting point. It's a different way to think about this. And this is, of course, something that industry can also be thinking about. Another example of where we really kind of push forward with new systems for governance, peer-to-peer, which are all very, very familiar again to the Ars Electronica community, but also, we were here tracking IP creation in real time in the blockchain back in 2017. So this is an experiment we did. We did a lot of work on how we can create systems for attribution in this fabrication space. And it really, really works. And this is interesting because, of course, I have actually been able to do a proposal for the European Innovation Council to do something like this, and I'm on the expert advisory group for that now. We are actually working on something similar now, which is actually quite sort of at a high level. And then when you look at how Industry 5.0 considers technology is really kind of equated with digitalization. Whereas in the new European Bauhaus, we're pushing for technology to be both frontier and vernacular. So basically, crafts and skills that are also technology. And this is also another very important sort of point of differentiation. And we've always framed everything we did in labs with moonshots. This is Imogen Heap sending her voice to the moon via the Dwingaloo radio telescope in the north of Holland, just because we could bounce it off of there and she could hear her voice back, and it was an experience. It was definitely an experience. It was 83 people who did that from all sort of like 32 countries, all the participants in the high-level lab. And of course, it shifts your mind into a different place as to sort of why we're doing it, what we're doing it for. I think that's pretty clear. It's not about it being massively innovative as a piece of technology. It's actually about where you're positioning yourself. And so when we look at Industry 5.0, it wants to upskill by training. So upskilling is obviously very important to keep the jobs. Within New European Bauhaus, we advocate for the future of work to be driven by missions. And so that's, again, it's a different approach. It's a completely different way to do this. And of course, for this, we need agile, lower risk public systems, for instance, of funding or in ways where we can allow the grassroots communities to actually prototype at a grand scale without barriers. And so finally, big contribution, I think, to policy is our idea of creating a space for common understanding. And I think this is what the arts do phenomenally well. And this is something that is now a methodology as part of the new European Bauhaus, hugely, hugely important about engaging communities and actually being able to precipitate behavioral change. So that's all for now from me. So hopefully we can sort of see how things have translated into policy, or how they are translated into policy much faster, thanks to culture being at the center.
Thank you, Michela. That spans a lot. That's impressive what you do there in the new European Bauhaus and how your voice is in there, I think. It's also interesting to see how your presentation is a real mix of artistic experimentation and these comparisons you make between the ideas that you formulate within the NAP and that are how it relates to that in Industry 5.0. We'll go into a discussion after all the presentations, unless there is a very urgent question from the audience. I have one. Do you also talk to the people of the Industry 5.0 teams, let's say?
Oh, absolutely. We are on, this, for instance, the Ontology Ecosystem is something that we are physically building. It's not just a prototype, it's actually being built, and it's a huge consortia, and it's actually international consortia. So it's gathered so much momentum. This idea of industry commons, creating an industry commons, has gathered so much momentum. We got Japan, Korea, China, Brazil, and also advisors from the US, and sort of, high-level people in high-level positions who want to be engaged with this. So it's actually more of a global initiative. And yeah, industry is, I was actually surprised as to just how much industry has jumped on board, but I think the space has matured for this. And this is what when I say it takes a while for spaces to mature to the level where we understand the next paradigm shift, but this is definitely now ready.
Yeah, let's talk about that further after the two following presentations that are also talking about this ecosystem or representing this ecosystem, yet also much from a grassroots perspective. I have also introduced them before in the panel we just had, but I'm going to do them again. Marion Real is a systemic design researcher exploring co-creation processes in the territorial transformations towards circular economies and cosmopolitan localism. She's currently working at Fab Lab Barcelona and IAC, where she has coordinated the 10 pilots of the Cisco project, including the award-winning Remix El Barrio, which is actually the reason why we are now here. She's also an associate researcher at Estia, Chair, Bali, and the Center of Circular Design. And she's together here with her colleague, Anastasia Pistofidou, who is a digital fabrication expert, wearables and textiles practitioner, biomaterial maker, and educator. Part of Fab Lab Barcelona and the IAC team since 2011, and a tutor, advanced manufacturer, office manager, coordinator, and researcher. She's currently leading the materials and textiles strategy area at Fab Lab and Barcelona and IAC. In 2013, she co-founded Fab Textiles, and in 2017, she co-founded Fab Academy, which she does with her colleague at Waag, Cecilia Raspanti. And the Fab Academy is a new textiles academy where they specifically also train and encourage people to do experiments that fit in this ecosystem, I would say. Fab Academy is a globally distributed program that explores the implications and applications of new technologies at the intersection of textiles, digital fabrication, and biology, nature-based solutions, I would say. She also works as a content curator for the Fab Foundation. So you're going to once again present that great work, Remix El Barrio, and thereafter we'll have another presentation of Areti Markopoulou, who I will introduce then. So please give the team of Remix El Barrio again a warm applause.
Thank you, Lucas. This time in this presentation we will present more our personal trajectory, the body of work that we have been developing through the years. First I would like, let's get back in place and all together think about what is this panel about. We are talking about the future of sustainable manufacturing. And I would like that we can also try to do a common exercise to take some post-its if you have at home and think what would be one word that you would say about the future of sustainable manufacturing. I would say that my first word is creativity. And with this, I would like to introduce my presentation. Something that may sound a little bit naive or romantic, but it's a little short video with a little poem about the future of sustainable manufacturing, if you want to say that. So we can have the presentation. No, it needs to go back. Sorry. Yeah. So here we are. It's yeah.
Is there sound to it?
Yes.
Can we get sound to the video? suggest you turn a little bit.
Okay, maybe
Yeah.
I will go there then to see
Yeah,
a little
that
bit
is,
better.
that is a good solution. Your
Drop on?
microphone? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, okay. So this was a project that I did in collaboration with a fashion designer, very young fashion designer within COSME fund, very little help, financial help for small, medium enterprises called Worth Project. Yeah, so.
Yeah,
Yes.
there he goes.
So,
It's slow, so
yes.
yeah.
So, I think creativity is the first and most important part when we want to establish new narratives. And it is also manifested. For example, in the Green Economy Coalition, we say we urgently need new narratives to imagine the impossible. So they are calling us to imagine the impossible. Also, climate change is a failure of imagination. So why don't we have some imagination? Let's be very creative, unleash our creativity, and let's imagine and illustrate how we would think the future factory, or you can say future microfactory, which I would like to call the dream place. It's a place where you have infrastructure that is common, and that you can use it freely to create your prototypes, products, because we are heading towards a society where the prototype is the final product. This is at least what I believe. And not only that, that you have this dream place, but you are also surrounded by a like-minded community where you can exchange knowledge, where you can learn from each other, where you can help each other and go further. And in this case, you can create new narratives, getting inspired from science fiction literature. You know, in the 60s, they wrote so much about how they imagine the future. And this is an illustration of a picture of what we would think about now that is common, like the Oculus, no? The augmented reality. And these things were written in science fiction in the 60s. And why don't we write now about how we want to imagine our future? Have time and make space for material speculation. In this case, the student of Fab Academy, Barcelona, Lara Campos, she weaved and spun yarn, embedding seeds, and then made her own loom and wove this material that is a growing fabric. And the project was called Be Grounded. So how you can immerse into the experience of a living textile. So you have, and all of this, like, embrace your ideas and embody them, live with your ideas, be your user tester, make experiments and try to see if your experiments are working for you first as part of your everyday practice. Here you see some artistic residency. We had through a Creative Europe program in the Fab Lab in 2013, where we made this garment that was dancing with the music. It was moving, this fairy fair. And I think that when we want to create a common infrastructure, then we can look into the model of the Fab Lab network. Call it Fab Lab, call it Makerspace, call it Hackerspace, however you want to call it. It doesn't, the title doesn't matter so much. It's kind of creating a same tool set, language, working with GitHub so that you can commit and have a collaborative documentation so that you can merge the knowledge and expand the knowledge. Sharing software and hardware, machinery, but most of all sharing this open thinking. That basically it's as if we are saying that if we had an R&D department in a company with 3 engineers, they would go X, they would develop something like at level 3. But if you have the whole world in an open source way develop it something, then the evolution will be so much more agile and fast. So we are talking about a network that shares these values, which is the Fab Lab network. I come from Fab Lab Barcelona. I have been there since 2011. I studied at the Institute of Advanced Architecture at IAC Architecture, but I'm not practicing exactly architecture, or I'm doing body architecture. I don't know how you can call it. And this is an expanding network, and within the network, there are also various opportunities and types of collaboration. Lately, I'm working on a project that it has to do with empowering future female innovators for the sustainable fashion industry through skills and networks. And this is called She Makes. It's a new project that I am working on, and I think that it really puts into the practice how we can have a gender-balanced environment within an engineering and geeky environment like the Fab Labs. You know, that you have the coders, you have the engineers, and suddenly you want to embrace the fact that women can also be part of this space. And with this practice, we think also that we can have radically new approaches to products, processes, and markets by having access to tools, to a different kind of ecosystem, different disciplines. Here you can see the project of Remix El Barrio Squeeze the Orange, which is a fruit leather made out of orange peels. And this is something that is coming in the market, believe it or not, but it's something that very soon, we have also initiatives that they are smaller enterprises that they do this kind of bio-based leathers, but it's something that is new. We dedicate ourselves into the multidisciplinarity, combining digital fabrication like 3D printed fabrics and textiles, the wearable technology, embedding electronics and soft circuits on the body, biomaterials, and parametric design. And you can understand that this kind of approach is, this without sound, sorry. You can understand that this kind of approach is defining also new types of disciplines. We can see, for example, that 10 years ago, if you would say, I will become an app developer, then they wouldn't understand what you're talking about. We have new careers, new disciplines that they are emerging, and the industry itself requires new skills for the digital transformation. I can say that I cannot define myself as an architect. Maybe I am a heritage explorer or some discipline that is not invented yet. And this is by combining the different aspects and the different tools. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you go to
it will go. I don't know where you should point it at.
No, me neither.
I don't know where the computer is.
Sorry. It was some in the process making. We said that, and it's the next slide, I think. Could you please move forward the slide? Yeah. Thank you. So we are talking about radically creating new products, such as fully 3D printed shoes made in the Fab Lab that they are wearable, they are final products, rescuing old traditions. This is a medieval technique of leather molding, and in this case, collaborating with the fashion designer through new aesthetics and digital aesthetics, rescuing and trying to bring back in the market old traditional processes, using 3D printing and additive manufacturing for jewel making. These are examples of the work that we have been developing in the lab, and using also living organisms, because we also work with biology, such as color-producing bacteria, chromobacteria, in order to dye fabrics, as we know that the chemical dyes are one of the most important reasons for the contamination of water from the textile industry. In this case, there is no use of water, and we use the bacterial dyes for dyeing fabrics. And also, here you can see a mushroom leather hat, and this collaboration with the designer, as I said before, with short-term collaboration to make different kind of products that are in the market as haute couture. And mainly, in the end, the most important is the understanding how we can transmit this knowledge, and we can contribute to the further development of these, you could say, experiments, but actually it's also what is happening in the industry at the same time. And we do this through open source guidebooks, cookbooks, tutorials, and material libraries. We have a tangible material library at the lab where you can see each of the materials. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can see the recipe and replicate it. You can find online different kind of recipes that you can follow, and also some kind of open source publications, short books that you can follow at home by doing this. And this is very important because the open source is something that it needs to become part of our mentality. Also, the project of Remix El Barrio shows that the importance is not in the designer, but its importance is in the collaboration, in the co-creation. It is not anymore, as our friend from Precious Plastics, David Hacken, said, I went to school, to the design school, and they told me, you need to be like the designer, like Philip Stark. And this is not our future anymore. The future is to be a team, an ecosystem, and the role of designer doesn't have any importance anymore. Consider whether nature would ask who is the designer. Nature would never ask who is the designer. And this we do in distributed ways. So when we talk about the future of education, and I wouldn't say the future of education, I would say today's education, I would, and looking into the university, a university that has no border. We do this through peer-to-peer educational networks. We have set up nodes, different nodes all over the world where we do exchange of knowledge, learning by doing, and we create these hybrid careers. This is my current passion and mission, because I also work with a mission, as we heard before. And this has been done since 2017. It is now may seem as the current normal because COVID brought online education into the public, but this has been in practice in the Fab Lab network since 10 years, before teleconferencing systems existed. And in this case, we really want to work at the intersection of disciplines, where we have a set of different skills that combine, and our values are sustainability, Industry 4.0, 5.0, innovation narratives, and biotechnology. And we have this program that is incubating designers, and it is incubating designers from 18-year-old to 65, because we also think that education has no age. We think that under the new technology, the knowledge of new technology, we are all equal, so you can study something at any age. And we would like to respond to William Gibson, the science fiction writer, when he was saying that the future is here, but it's just not widely distributed yet. We would like to tell him that we would like to make sure that you know, Mr. Gibson, that we are doing the best that we can to distribute the future. And I will give the continuing of the conversation to my colleague Marion, that will talk about all of these things, but more in a systemic and overall level. Sometimes, you know, when you are creative, you cannot contextualize and understand and measure the really impact of the things. So it is very good also to collaborate and have a counterpart that can understand what is happening. No?
Thanks, Anastasia. I will be brief, just to comment some mindset also to adapt when we are thinking about this new system and the future of manufacturing. There is this model that was created some years ago now, really to think that it's important to think about the context and the local context where we are designing this now framed as multiple local circular economies. And when we are in one bubble, what you see on the second map, there is, of course, the creativity is super important, and we need to guide it that with this strong energy that we have and that can bring. But also, we need to be super vigilant, and as it was mentioned on the talk yesterday, we need also to be skeptical about what we do, what we create, and feed these critics during the design process and doing this collaboratively. So another design here, the model that we have built, it's the distributed design platform, which is also associated as partner of the NEB context. It's really important in a local context to recreate connection, interaction between citizens, between local manufacturer, between a recycling facility, and to really create this loop. And Fab Lab can really play a big role here. What is important, and we mentioned it a bit in the discussion before, is to reinvent, of course, the place that we want, where we want to fabricate. And I think with Remixel Bio, it was really an important point when we think about this making that is happening, how we want to scale it. And I think this mentality to really keep it local and accessible, it's really important here. And we need to be vigilant really about this kind of movement and rhythm where we can go when we talk about like, big scale production. We really need to think also in that sense and make this voluntary promotion a bit of what is the role of tools and technology. It's a big question, many authors, many theory about that, but when we think about digital deal and we want to think about the future of technology, we also need to revise and look after this kind of concept that was produced in the literature, which is the conviviality approach from Illich, the low-tech approach, the appropriate technology, also mentioned by Schumacher, and of course, what Anastasia mentioned, all this philosophy of open source is quite key in that world that is sometimes facing a lot of contradiction. So I would like to finish the talk to say also, and I like really to promote this systemic design thinking, to think and to make designer people think that it's not a shame to talk about contradiction, about tension, and we really need to make projects and to take time to really talk about what's wrong also on what we are designing, to also after benefit from creative synthesis. So co-creation is about making trade-off with different things. It's about really fostering creativity. And yes, I think this is the message we wanted to tell and to discuss now with you, Lucas, and the panel. Thanks for letting us us talk about this.
Thank you, thank you. It's a very interesting conclusion to take further. It's a kind of a post-research situation where you don't make a distinction, what you can also see in the Starts Prize, between what exactly is the artist or exactly is the designer or the engineers that you collaborate, etc. But first, unless there are very urgent questions from the audience, I want to go to our last speaker, not last but not least, Areti Markopoulou, actually your academic leader. She's a Greek architect, researcher, and urban technologies working at the intersection between architecture and digital technologies. She is the academic director of IAC in Barcelona, where she also leads the Advanced Architecture Group, a multidisciplinary research group exploring how design and science can positively impact and transform the present and future of built spaces, the way we live there and interact, and also design, I would say. Her research and practice focus on redefining the architecture of cities through the ecological and technological spectrum, combining design with biotechnologies, new materials, design fabrication, and big data. Please give her an applause.
Thank you, Lucas, for the introduction. And thank you also, Michela, Anastasia. I mean, there have been like a couple of great introductory talks for this panel, Fabrication Deep Dive. So I will try to contribute from my side as well in relation to at the architectural scale and of course the construction sector, because I want to highlight the urgency of an alternative model of architectural design and construction, since, as many of you know, our construction industry is the world's largest consumer of raw materials, but also the world's largest waste generator. Our demolition and construction waste account for approximately 30% of all the waste that we generate in the EU and similar numbers in the world. And of course, as you probably observe every day in our environment, we are surrounded by concrete. Concrete, actually, it's the second most widely used substance in Earth after water. And we know that it is also the most destructive material on Earth in terms of CO2 emissions, but also in terms of the natural resources that they are necessary to be extracted for its production. Now, the impact that is reflected in this data is basically a consequence driven from a linear model of make, use, and dispose. We have already heard a bit about this from the previous speakers. But if we aim to restore our current human and architectural impact in the planet, then we need to work towards circular systems in architecture and construction, systems that aim to close or at least to limit material and resource loss while having the potential to minimize waste or using it as a resource in itself. And when we are talking about this circular thinking, then nature, of course, becomes a solid base to learn from. Nature operates in the principle of abundance rather than the principle of scarcity. We keep on discussing today of what we lack, but I think that we need to change our mindset towards abundancy. Waste, for example, in nature is a concept that doesn't recognize in its function of its life cycle. It basically recognizes waste as a resource that could be used in another life cycle. So this is something that, in a way, we need to learn from. So how can we minimize then waste in architecture? How can we make a shift from a mindset of scarcity towards a mindset of abundance? I would like to very quickly discuss 3 ways to achieve that in architecture and construction. The first one is introducing circular and natural materials in architecture. The second way is to enhance alternative construction techniques, mainly on-site construction techniques. And the third one is to design for longevity and repair, to design basically for disassembly in our built environment. So for introducing circular materials in architecture, the first thing we need to do is to understand the potential of waste. I think that the Remix project, the winner of this prize, clearly states that. But also to understand how this waste could be used as a new matter in different scales, from the product design, but also to the building block and to the architectural block. We are especially working with organic waste from agriculture, and we're trying to transform them into valuable construction materials. This is a project that is we're developing, and it includes basically creating structural building composites of biochar. I'm not sure if everybody is aware that biochar is basically the byproduct of the pyrolysis of organic and agricultural waste. So in principle, we are talking about a solid material that it is mainly sequestrated carbon. No? So we sequestrate the carbon during the pyrolysis process and we transform it into matter. So building with biochar means, in a way, developing not just zero, but negative carbon emissions building solutions for architecture. And as you see in some of these images, we're working with combining design with certain manufacturing techniques, such as casting for 3D printing, for columns, beams, or load-bearing walls, with the goal of achieving buildings that are made out of CO2 instead of emitting CO2. And the most interesting part of this work is that biochar is actually an excellent soil fertilizer. So when the life cycle of these buildings, of this building composite is over, then they can be separated and we can send them back to soil to fertilize it. So why can't we imagine building bricks that they are negative carbon and they can eventually feed our soil for increasing agricultural production once their lifespan is over? And beyond upcycling materials and using waste as future matter, I think that we should not forget that there is a whole world of abundance in materials in nature, something that we seem that we have forgotten because we got stuck a bit with the concrete revolution and the steel revolution. But since many years at IAC, with the participation of a lot of different students and researchers and experts, we have been working and we have been revisiting earth constructions and technologically enhance them in order to create affordable and circular housing. Now, up to 99% of the materials used in our custom earth mix that we have created, they can be found locally. So in a way, we can use the soil below or around the constructions in order to create our matter to construct. And then the earth mix is biodegradable, it is locally found, and since it requires no firing, this mix requires no firing as traditional vernacular architecture, then this also means that once you build a prototype or a housing and its lifespan is over, then you can reuse that material to construct another one. And I think that in the current reality of displaced populations, especially this kind of ideas of what is temporal, what is, let's say, permanent, are ideas that needs to be rethought and reapplied. Now, although many connect earth architecture with developing countries, we always insist and we foresee that these earth-based constructions, they can also be present in the west part of our world, and they can radically question the contemporary concrete manufacturing, its environmental footprint, and it can even open up discussions of new aesthetics in our built environments. At our department, at the Advanced Architecture Group, we have also been working in the last decade with an obsession of combining robotic manufacturing with additive manufacturing for on-site construction. The on-site construction as a concept is a powerful one because it can contribute to reduce the ecological and monetary cost of transporting materials and equipment. And it can also offer the possibility of using, as I was saying before, locally sourced materials. On the other hand, additive manufacturing, 3D printing is a technique that it is basically requires no joints or molds in its production, and that means that it reduces waste. And you can also only deposit material where you actually need it. So the excess of material that we can find in our contemporary constructions is actually something that we can avoid. In this project that it is called Mini Builder, we have developed it some years ago. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Architecture has always been.
So in this project, we have actually tried to work together with robotic engineers and learn from swarm robotics in order to create our own tools for on-site construction, because the industry was not actually providing any. And we have been aiming to create mobile machines that can print bigger than themselves, because the problem in 3D printing is that it works fine when you are working in the small scale of product, but it works absolutely no fine if you want to produce bigger objects such as architectural ones. So instead of creating huge machines here, the idea was to create small machines that they can intelligently work together in order to produce objects that they are larger than themselves. And with the same goal of mobile machines that they can go on site, we have been collaborating with Technalia, and we have observed that they have this cable robot in their factory, and they were using it to transport heavy objects or to paint airplanes. And then we thought, hey, why can't we hack that machine in order to create one that could become a very easily assembled 3D printer on site that could cover like a big area. And this is what we did from previous work from some of our students and researchers. We created a nozzle, and then we attached that nozzle to the cable robot, and we created a huge 3D printer that we have tested in different places. Lastly, in one big exhibition of construction where we wanted to showcase in 4 days real time that we can construct a 1-to-1 scale big prototype. And I think that, I mean, it's another way to think about sustainable or circular design, is that it's important to realize that it's not just about using natural materials, or it's not just about using upcycle waste, but we need to use as few resources as possible in the first place. And we need to keep resources in circulation for as long as possible. And that makes design highly relevant, because design for longevity, or design for repairability in mind, or design for disassembly, they are crucial concepts so that materials can be easily dismantled and be reused when the lifespan of a building is over. And one way to approach design for disassembly is to design material systems out of scratch. The skyscraper, the wooden skyscraper that we see in the screen is representing that way. We can start out of scratch, and we can design so that we can take apart then the material and the pieces. But then another way is to take advantage of the existing building stock that we can find in our built environment. So using technologies of mapping, tracing, or scanning, we can evaluate the existing materials in buildings, and this can help us create what we call material passports for buildings and material libraries for reuse in construction. So it's not like we evaluate a building anymore just with a LEED certificate, but we can also evaluate with a material passport, which showcases where the material came from, but more importantly, where they can go after. And this is a project that it is developed in our Master in Robotics and Advanced Construction program at IAC. And here students and faculty have been using drones to scan the building elements of our facilities at IAC in Barcelona and collect data on the size of the building elements, their type, and their materiality, and then in a way we combine algorithmic design with digital fabrication in order to develop a process of reusing material and minimizing waste while maximizing efficiency in construction. And then similar techniques can also be found or take place at an urban scale. In our city and technology master program, we have used artificial intelligence techniques such as computer vision or machine learning in order to analyze huge amounts of geotagged street views and street view images and create actually building stock classification maps. So in this work, almost 18,000 of street view images of building apartments in Barcelona has been scraped with the goal to create materially libraries and detailed geolocated maps of, for instance, concrete, steel, or timber buildings. And the possibility of creating material libraries, of course, becomes fundamental for the reuse of this building stock, but the fact that we can geolocate these libraries, this adds another value to the circular design process, because materials can be chosen not only based on their appropriate typology, but for reuse, but also based on how close they are to the new construction site. And I think that this would make a huge difference when we are talking about circular design and circular economy in urban environments. So I will sum up by saying that, well, this short work actually highlights the importance of Anastasia was talking about creativity, but I think what is also important is the combination of design with science. Design by default includes creativity, but if we also combine it with science, then we are able to push our discipline to rethink its operation. And of course, we also need to, we are coming from academies, and I think that what it is important is that we create spaces for experimentation, but we also change our pedagogical models so that we can allow the future architects or the future constructors to think in a much more holistic way. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to discuss with all the four great speakers today.
Thank you, Areti. Fantastic. Again, also like the project of Remax El Barrio, and also, however, you touched upon them much quicker, all the examples of experimentations by artists and creatives you showed, Michela. It may sound kind of naive, but I still want to ask that question. This is the START stage. START is science, technology, and the arts. One of its aims is to bring all that type of creativity and the inventions you find there to industry. But it's a question to all of you. Where are the hurdles that should be taken in order to get more industry in this context, and also more of the type of industry that we want? So not extractive industries, industries of the commons, industries that are more inclusive, industries that are not only there for shareholder value. And that may be also a very Eurocentric kind of approach if you combine that, or if you juxtaposition that towards the American industry or a Chinese type of approach. So any one of you, can you say something to that? Or shall I choose? Michela.
Okay. I didn't want to sort of hijack the stage. Well, one of the, I think, interesting things is educating industry on the idea of a rigorous artistic practitioner. So there is a misconception that artist is someone who gets struck by a bolt of lightning, for no better word. And there is an issue with that, of course, because there is an idea that, you know, the rigor of a scientist or an engineer is, you know, it's constructed on this idea of deduction and induction, and it's a linear process, and it sounds very, very rational. So when you look at it, you know that there's going to be, you know, it's built on prior art, and there's going to be an outcome, etc. But there are two things that it misses completely. One is that in the context of an artistic practitioner, you have the method is actually just as rigorous if you are really good at what you do. And everybody here who's present in this discussion is a rigorous researcher. But what you do is you try and explode the views. You try and put in as many elements or as many perspectives as possible into your work so that you can actually approach it from different directions. And this is something that's missed because it's also a rigor. It's a rigorous research. So it's nothing to do with the bolt of lightning. It's got to do everything to do with very, very hard work and rigorous work. And that method is incredibly important when you're faced with the, you know, the sort of paradigm of unknown unknowns, which is bandied around at the moment quite a lot, which is the idea that, you know, with all of the new frontiers that we're facing, with not just the challenges, but also with what the technologies are throwing at us, the sort of surprises that are being thrown at us. A lot of the time, those cannot be handled with the traditional linear approach because you just simply don't have prior art on this stuff. And sometimes it happens incredibly quickly, or a huge amount of new information comes out very, very quickly. And that becomes actually an issue of being able to manage the amount of information that's coming out and being able to have the correct method to then infer the more salient parts of what is coming out of the new experimentation. So this artistic approach suddenly becomes really, really significant. And providing we can educate industry and get them to understand that this is a method, and it's a proper, a proper research method. It's a method that generates a huge amount of new knowledge in these scenarios. Then all of a sudden it becomes incredibly important for what they are facing at the moment. And so as a result of some of this being communicated to industry, or industry witnessing in the labs, including, you know, Fab Lab Barcelona, but including other labs that have been prototyping and actually pushing forward, as some of our speakers have said, basically try and compare 3 engineers in a room to a whole network, open source network creating together, and see how far you will get. As a result of witnessing this, they're actually requesting experimental labs for some of the new industrial solutions, because they want to see, first of all, they want some people who are trained to illuminate subject matter from different perspectives to help them create the solutions, and also because they actually need this kind of injection of open mentality, where huge amount of different practitioners can actually contribute to creating a solution. And they realize that the 3 engineers in the room are not going to hack it by themselves. So, you know, there is awareness out there already. And as I say, you know, we're working with the likes of Airbus and Siemens and Bosch, etc. So the big guys. And there are champions inside industry who actually recognize this, who are part of our community. So I don't know, I should probably hand it over to the Fab Lab. And also thank you to Areti for a wonderful, wonderful talk, which I would love some of our colleagues in the NEB to see, actually. But I would love for the Fab Lab, for our winners rather, to actually tell us, because I'm sure that Fab Lab has members who are from industry, who come in and engage. Am I right in saying that?
Areti?
Okay, sorry. I thought that was a question for Anastasia and Marion, but I can jump in.
It was, but
oh, I'm sorry.
It was, right?
Then it's my mistake. Sorry,
no,
but
I was thinking, no, like this is like a very, very important question. It's always the most important question, especially for the ones that we're working with research projects and with innovative, let's say, ideas that we're trying to implement and then to evaluate in terms of, cultural impact or economic impact. I think that when we're talking about industry, there are two key words related to that. The one is feasibility, economic feasibility, environmental feasibility, and the other one is demand, no? And I think that the way that we are operating from our disciplines could affect both of them, right? So on the one hand, feasibility is something that we can somehow, let's say, prove or test by pushing as much as possible to create pilot projects. We need to have pilot projects that fail, and we need to try again and fail again and try again, because we cannot change, especially from in the construction sector, where it's a sector that is so slow to innovation, and it does not accept anything unless something is very well proven, because regulations need to change. Then I think that the pilot projects that could showcase how certain new ideas could add value to the existing market and to the existing, let's say, production, it's fundamental. And then, of course, the European projects and the collaborations with research centers, industries, or city administrations, I think these are very important partnerships, because in a way they are all committed to produce this kind of new ideas in the form of pilot projects. And then in relation to the demand, I think that we need to be a bit more influential and try to somehow also understand that society is changing. The needs of the society is changing, and then industry responds to certain demands, no? And if we as society understand that we have a lot of power by creating collectives that we ask for different kind of processes or for different kind of products, then this would affect, also the way that the usual business is happening. And I also want to say that the crisis moment in Europe was a very interesting moment, because, it was the moment that the industries, the first thing that they eliminated in order to survive economically was their research department. And when that happened, and things started to go back because they were searching for innovation and new ideas, then there was a huge demand on collaborating with different artists, scientists, research centers, or academies. And I think that this collaboration, this kind of merge, is also very fundamental, because we cannot, let's say, believe that as solitary artists we can solve the huge challenges that we're facing. So we need to have this collaboration between individuals, between creatives, between scientists, between academies and industries. And I don't know if that answered the question, but it was...
It's a complex question, and I think we can talk a lot about it. But it's also a discussion that we are having within the Startprice Consortium. I give the word to you, because there is indeed a need of bringing industry closer, or bringing this closer to industry. So
I think that I will dare to be a little bit more radical. I think that I can assume this role for this panel, to be a little bit more radical. And say that two examples, I will give two examples. The first example is that I don't know if you know that the French law, the whole law, is on GitHub, which means that anyone in the world can read and contribute, make corrections, make suggestions to the French law, the Statute. And I think that this is a great example, because we could apply this to everything, especially when we talk about technological innovation, new findings, and when we think that the world is a playground and it belongs to all of us, not only to us, but also to nature, and that we are all contributors to the same thing. We want to go further, and we also want to be inclusive, we want to be fair, wag, and open. No? So the second example is the example that happened, the big scandal of the COVID with the Italian team of Fab Lab makers, that they, in the need of creating ventilators for the COVID last year, they made adaptation on a design of a company, and the company sued them. So here we have an example where we see that the human brain has gone a little bit wrong because we need to save lives, and we are talking about to who belongs this design. No? And this is completely wrong value for humanity, I think. So I would say to the industry that they need to also understand and change. They also, in law-wise, licenses, copyrights, and the work Michela is doing is amazing towards this. No, we need the passports, the digital passports. We need to trace back, and in software we can trace back because you can see the contributors, but in hardware it's always more difficult. So this is something that could help, and that I think that it's a little bit more radical, and it needs a lot more of people that are working more into politics, policies, laws, and all of these things. But I would say that this is my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yet at the same time, I would also say there's not just one industry. It's not. I also hear Michela say something about Bosch, which is a company that is eager to learn about what is happening at IAC, what is happening in Industry Commons, and all this. I think you're perfectly right that is another frontier where we also should work towards, where there's also issues, and also related to Industry Commons, where you're mentioning ledger technologies, for instance, which in the Next Generation Internet project, which is a big project also of the European Commission, which is pushing ledger technology for societal uses, there is this discrepancy between pushing new sorts of applications and then really not knowing how to put them into the market. So I think there is a lot of ground that needs to be covered, not only from the European Commission itself or from the creatives like we have in this panel that actually do research on behalf of the European Commission. You're paid with a prize, you're awarded, and righteously so, with a prize, but also from the industry. So I think it's also seeking where you can bring parts together, and I would be very interested to make use of all the cases that are discussed here. And it certainly is also a discussion within the Starts Prize, how to look at the winning projects and bring them to the political arena and to where technology is produced that you also in part apply in the projects you do, up next to the technologies that you're inventing yourself.
And this was also to the manifesto. In the Remix El Barrio, we wrote a manifesto about policymakers.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic, and that's also something that we see more often. Maybe you can say something that is in the manifesto. We didn't see that so much in the presentation of all the products you are and the material experiments you're doing.
Yes, there is this manifesto is accessible online, of course. One thing we can say maybe is I can say two things, that it's sometimes involving global policy, but also just local stakeholder and local policymaker or agent. One is to promote really this this transformation, this sharing of knowledge, and to engage with different workshop, activity, educational program, and to really take this as a source of change, in fact. And after maybe more on the social entrepreneurship side, which is more a concern, I think you can see that it's about promoting the design of the cooperative, and also how we can support it from any level, no, any scale. And more globally, I would like, it's not just about the manifesto of Remix El Barrio, it's about all the work that has been done in the Ciscode project, which was really about rethinking co-creation in science, technology, and innovation. And there is many content here. There was 10 overlaps also working on different societal challenge. And they always struggle with this sustainability aspect of the project. And it's true that inside the project, we came with different solutions. First is one axis was about reinforcing the co-creation skills about the organization, but after it was also to really try to set up different partnership with the different stakeholders. And I think here the Start Prize is a good example for us. It's really like an opportunity to push forward the thinking and the project that we have developed.
Yeah. Allow me quickly also to say something again about reflow, because reflow is about creating circular material flows with waste streams in urban environments, is also looking at the business model, but the business model also needs to be supported by open source technologies, but also community support. So you also need citizens to be engaged and be activated. Yeah. IAC and FabLab Barcelona are also part of that specific project reflow that I just also wanted to mention in this context. I'm looking at the clock. We're having a long day. I think there is still a lot more to talk about, specifically about what type of industries you want to bring together here, what type you maybe also not want at this point in time where you are in an experimental stage, and also where you need to position your project maybe also more effective towards policy. So there's a lot of dynamics going on there. I think that is supported by NEP, by the STARTS initiative as a whole, but also, and they are most in detail, in all the examples, the STARTS Prize projects that were awarded, but also the projects that were shown by Michela and Areti. I want to thank you all for a set of fantastic presentations. I thought it was very inspiring. I learned a lot. I hope you as an audience did so as well. I hope so also the audience that is online. Thanks once more. In 15 minutes, we're going to have a next panel that will also interest you of the Fab Academy, because it's about a new value chain for fashion. It has quite a lot of speakers: Karen Vlek, Silke Hofman, Sofia Guggenberger, Eugenia Morfurgo, Filippo Nassetti, Vincenzo Reale, Malou Bemer, Anke Lo, Sandra Nicole Nielsen, Tim van der Loo, Loretta Vignat Streeter, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce that well, Alexander Bello. And it's moderated by Christiane Luble-Beer. And it's looking at new technologies and processes that enable fashion production to return to places where textiles are worn. I think you also participated in the TCBL project, which was also about localizing, bringing textile production back to the local. I leave the further introduction of this panel to the moderator. That will be here in 15 minutes. So stay tuned. We're going to watch Start's videos, I guess, in the meantime, in the break. I want to thank you as audience, and again, I want to thank you as speakers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So Botanical Tailoring is a co-research project with Care Applications here in Alcoy, Spain, that was born to really rethink about what we see as traditional clothing in Western society. So the aim of the project is really to extract colors and aromas from plants from this area and apply them to textiles, and then to later on apply them to bespoke tailoring garments. So garments that are made by hand, that are made to last, and that are made for a purpose. So really keeping sustainability in mind, and working with the really great technologies here of Care Applications that use much less water than traditional dyeing processes, and to really maximize the color extractions from these plants, and then using technologies like microencapsulation to add scent to these garments and to really create a multisensorial collection. So we've been dyeing with plants like oranges, olive leaves from the area of Alcoy to really talk about the community and see how we can make an impact with local agricultures and really see how we can use the land in a different way.